Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Today is the 19th of March 2025, and I'm going to do this segment to what would have been part of the hits and losses video at the end, where I try and talk a little bit about peace negotiations particularly, but this would have taken up too much of the time, so I'm separating it out. This is the dust settling over the phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump last night, obviously without Ukraine really involved at that stage. This is the US trying to mediate between the two sides. And yet I think one of the main senses that I'm gathering from this is that the US still, or at least the Trump administration, still sees these negotiations as a form of economic negotiations directly with Russia. There's all like probably over 50% of what they are trying to do here has nothing to do with peace in Ukraine, and everything to do with doing deals with the Russians. But of course, they can't be seen to be doing those deals without peace in Ukraine. So it's like, okay, let's get this peace out of the way as soon as we can, as quickly as we can, so that we can get on with making money. Okay. So when it comes to the peace negotiations themselves, or at least a telephone call from last night, what's been the main takeaway? Well, if you look at a lot of the media, it looks something like this. So Trump's call with Putin signals a long road ahead to Russia-Ukraine deal. Russia's leader didn't agree to a full ceasefire and presented his own demands to end the fighting. And I think that's broadly how I see it, which is that the phone call was a bit of a nothing burger and was actually what we probably expected, well, certainly what I expected, which is that Russia would come back to the US with a list of maximalist demands, and the US would have to take them now to Ukraine, and Ukraine will have to see whether to agree to them or not. They're obviously not going to agree to them, and then the question remains, will the US hit Ukraine with a stick because they haven't agreed to the ceasefire negotiated desires, except they're not negotiated, they've been dictated by the Russians. But of course, the US might be able to blame Zelensky in Ukraine for not signing up to these completely unrealistic demands. That's kind of where we're at the moment. I think Trump was probably in... am I correct in believing Terry was saying last night that Trump was due to give a press conference and then didn't? In other words, there was an element of disappointment that you could read between the lines last night. And I think you could read that in his interview with Laura Ingraham from Fox News, kind of a softball interview with his favorite propaganda channel there. Now, that was low key. Like, if you look at, there were no hands, there was no excitement. Greg Terry made a really good observation last night of, like, you know, when he's excited and when he's animated, you know, it reflects that he's in a good place as far as he's concerned. He's combative and he's G'd up. Actually, last night he was sitting very still, no hand movements, and was very downbeat. And I think there must be a realization that he got done. Now, people like Steve Witkoff have come out and said it was the greatest ever phone call type thing, really standing by Trump and saying, like, he's honestly just what an incredible leader. But I don't think that you can read that by any other data that's coming out from that interaction. I think, and if you listen to the absolutely fascinating interview on Foreign Affairs with Fiona Hill, I think she has it right that Trump is pretty much unprepared. He doesn't have the requisite knowledge. So if you're going into a phone call like that, it becomes about personality, but then you're not in the same room. So it becomes about a voice, and then it becomes about the translator speaking to you. And actually, that is very difficult, I would have thought. Maybe it's a video conference, but it's going to be very difficult for, I think, Trump to get some kind of advantage over Putin. Putin's wily. He knows what he's doing. He's done his research. He knows an absolute ton of stuff about everything. Okay? He's not stupid, but I would argue that Trump is. And not as a kind of, as I keep saying, not as a pejorative. Like, what I mean is he's like really ignorant. He just doesn't know enough stuff. And so if you're not coming in with requisite knowledge, what are your tools that you have? How can you get one over on Putin? I also think the problem is that the starting point for Trump isn't right. We need to make sure that Ukraine comes out of this in the best possible position. He couldn't give one toss about Ukraine and the political moral outcome for them. So everything is about getting peace in order to do trade deals. So it's about trade deals. And even then, it appears that he didn't get what he wanted. And it started off badly because there was this conference going on yesterday where Putin was, in front of a big audience, and they're all basically laughing essentially at Trump here. Putin had Trump sitting by the phone for what must have felt like hours, and like really this was happening. So he's at this conference when he was supposed to be on the call to Trump, Putin was, and there was this call that came through from Peskov saying, you got to have this call with Trump. And he's like, yeah, don't worry, don't believe everything Peskov says. Just sits there and basically keeps Trump waiting in public, right? So already you have a power play from Putin that essentially says, I'm the one that's in command. I get to dictate when we have this phone call. And then when you have that phone call, Trump's already going to be probably in a bad mood. And then you are just controlling it. So this is very clever stuff from Putin. And he just knows what he's doing. And I'm fairly sure that Trump would have been putty in his hands. Now, Boris Johnson, who's a big Trump fan, always stands by his mate Trump. Even his readout of the situation is pretty critical. What a surprise, Putin rejects an unconditional ceasefire. He wants to keep bombing and killing innocent Ukrainians. He wants Ukraine disarmed. He wants Ukraine neutralized. He wants to make Ukraine a vassal state of Russia. He isn't negotiating. He's laughing at us. Now, that's his readout from after the Trump-Putin telephone call. Then essentially he's saying that Putin's laughing at us, and that's after Trump should have got one over on Putin. In other words, that's a kind of indirect criticism of Trump's performance. Oliver Carroll here says, just as Putin talked with Trump, Ukrainians staged a surprise raid into Russia's Belgorod province south of Kursk. I'm told it was up to 3 weeks in the making. So, no, while this was going on, you've got a really coincidentally timed attack into Belgorod. I don't think it was pure coincidence, although 3 weeks in the making. But I'm sure that the choice of yesterday was pretty thought through. But then you had this agreement from the telephone call that Russia would stop aerial bombardments on. I say agreement because I'm not quite sure. Like I know this was a proposal for a ceasefire and a stop to strikes on energy infrastructure and other infrastructure as well. And then literally like a few hours after that telephone call, Sloviansk has its electricity cut as I think missiles slammed into the city. And so essentially, Putin sort of broke whatever agreement he was saying would be on the table immediately, which is again just a massive indicator of what Russia is and who Putin is, and also it's a reflection of their form in terms of breaking these agreements. So let's go to Trump on Laura Ingraham and see a number of the excerpts from that, and think about his body language, think about his voice, and also just wonder whether this was really about peace or whether it's about trade deals.
How can we trust that Vladimir Putin actually wants that, in that he's not also being influenced at the same time by his close friend, President Xi of China?
Well, look, we have our own discussions with President Xi of China, and he wants to get along also, and he's looking to get along, and we're looking to get along with him. And we will. We have a problem of trade where we have a very big imbalance with China. With Russia, we don't have that much trade, and they'd like to, and we'd like to also. They have some very valuable things for us, including very big forms of rare earth. They have a lot of earth. They have a big chunk of real estate, the biggest, the biggest in the world for a country, by far. And on that,
when you understand, and it is really interesting listening to Fiona Hill again talk about how he's a real estate mogul and he thinks in terms of real estate. And I thought, or maybe Rory Stewart was talking about this with Alistair Campbell I was listening to this morning. Just like that's how he thinks in terms of this really zero-sum game thinking, where he is like a real estate mogul and China and Russia or China is like some plumber that he wants to contract, and he has that power over them, and he has a very simplistic understanding of this of trade, but also of international politics. And I've said that many times before, but I think this is on show here, where he's just like, they've got all of that real estate, and all of these earth. They've got all this earth, rare earth, and that's what we want. He's not talking about Ukraine. He's not talking about the outcome of these talks for the country that's been invaded. He's talking about the outcome of these talks for the USA.
they have things that we could use, frankly, and that other people could use. I think that President Xi would like to get along, and I think Russia wants to get along with the United States. I also think we're a much different country than we were just a few months ago.
I think it's, really simple. Like, Trump is such a simplistic talker and thinker.
Putin actually said to me, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you as my enemy. He said that very strongly. But with all of that, I had a very good relationship with Putin. I had a very good relationship with President Xi, a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea.
Has he ever said he's had a good relationship with a democratic leader?
Lots of good relationships. And that's a positive thing. That's not a negative thing. But at the same time, I'm about our country. So that's why we're talking about tariffs. We'll be taking in trillions of dollars.
I want to get to the tariffs in a minute because we're gonna first hit the other.
Putin actually.
We'll get on to tariffs and the economy, but let's bring it back to that massive conversation you've just had with Putin. And here's another excerpt.
Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy.
Actually, we're going to, because I don't like the audio on that one, so most of that is in the next few clips. But this is Gerashenko's readout, Anton Gerashenko. President Trump made a number of statements about his conversation with Putin. The conversation was great, obviously. Putin didn't demand to stop providing aid to Ukraine. So one of the things that was pretty fascinating was this difference of opinion as to what was discussed on the phone. Trump denied that they talked about there being a stop of aid to Ukraine, and Putin said that was an absolute precondition. So Putin didn't demand to stop providing aid to Ukraine. The US and Russia can establish economic relations after the war. The United States intends to develop friendly relations with both Russia and China, and Russia has resources that the US needs, including rare earth metals. Okay, we've already heard much of that. Now let's go to this excerpt.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We got a readout of your call with Vladimir Putin, and it was a fairly optimistic take. Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure,
right,
but not to a 30-day ceasefire. Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation. We have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not.
So this is actually the opening of the interview. They're a bit out of order. This is the way a narcissist works, which is, I'm asked something, and my very first answer in this whole interview is how I'm amazing. This wouldn't have happened if I was in charge, and therefore the war is a fault of Joe Biden. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say, one, how amazing I am, and two, how innocent Putin is by extension. How there's no moral culpability for Putin here. And that's his opening answer.
Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation. We have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen. And it did happen. So that's where we are. And right now,
thanks for that. You
have a lot of guns pointing at each other. And a ceasefire, without going a little bit further, would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers.
A lie.
They're
that is false.
Encircled, and that's
no, they're not
good.
So he's still saying that. That was last night after the phone call with Putin when Ukraine has just invaded into Belgorod. They've taken their troops out of Sudzha and Kursk. That is not true. We all know that's not true, and he's lying again to Laura Ingraham.
And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this.
Okay, let's listen to him again.
Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen. And I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
Was there
Great call toward getting to peace. Talked about other things, so not just about peace, so doing trade deals. And I think the Middle East to some degree in Iran. But also, there was a warning there that this could turn into World War III if it doesn't get sorted out. Okay, here we get onto the disagreement with Russia.
I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid, actually. We didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
I think the Kremlin...
So someone's lying. I mean, I honestly don't know who, because Trump lies all the time, and Putin is KGB. Who knows? And as Caitlin Collins says, asked by Laura Ingraham of Putin demanding an end to aid, Trump said, no, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid. Actually, we didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed. And yet she also says, per the Kremlin readout of the Trump-Putin call, quote, it was emphasized that the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution through political and diplomatic means should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kiev. Now, it could what the most plausible explanation of this is that Trump wouldn't have sat down and had a readout after that. And this is again what Fiona Hill has said from personal experience with being on phone calls with Trump and Putin in the first administration. So she's been there, she's done it. He wouldn't have then sat down afterwards and gone, right, what have we learned from this? And you go through and you mull it over with all the people involved. It's probably like done and dusted. Right, I need to go and speak to Fox now. So pops out, speaks to Fox News, and actually there would have been a lot of 2 hours of talking. In all honesty, like if you're the age that Trump is, like you're not going to remember all the components of the conversation that's just taken place, especially as it's going to come through an interpreter, and so they might be droning on in a stilted way, and it becomes slightly more forgettable than if Putin had said it individually himself. So there's a very high probability that actually Trump's just forgotten what some of the key demands were on the phone. Like if he's not having a debrief after. So then Steve Witkoff comes out and he's basically saying how wonderful Trump is at every conceivable moment.
Led by our National Security Advisor and our Secretary of State. And I think, we've got to figure out those details. The point is that up until recently, we really didn't have consensus around these two aspects, the energy and infrastructure ceasefire and the Black Sea moratorium on firing. And today we got to that place. And I think it's a relatively short distance to a full ceasefire from there. And again, I stress that it was the president's former relationship with President Putin, the president stressing that they needed to engage in mutual trust together to bring this war to an end. President Putin, and I would commend him for this, said that he agreed with the president's posture on it all. He agreed with the approach. He didn't want to see more people dying, and led by...
So that's a very positive analysis of what's going on. Actually, I'm going to play you another excerpt from, looking at different screens and whatnot, synthesizing all this information at once. So this is the one where he's like absolutely waxing lyrical about how wonderful Trump is.
So I think there have been some breakthroughs. I would commend President Putin for all he did today on that call to move his country close to a final peace deal. And I would say, and I would give all the credit to President Trump, his election, peace through strength, the perception that there are no alternatives, that a good peace, a lasting peace, a durable peace is important for both sides. And the president was, I can't understate, or I can't overstate how compelling he was on this call. He's a natural born leader, Sean, and he demonstrated that today.
I've seen him in action. I know him pretty well, Steve, like you. I've known him 30 years, and there's no other human being like him. I will say that.
So I think they're
quite incredible how much they're pandering to Trump's, personality, flattering him immensely in terms of coming on national television and just bigging him up. And it's funnily enough, yesterday we heard from Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, Democrat, said that he in order to get aid he received aid for COVID, I think, during the Trump 1.0. And Trump said, now you've got to go out on television and you have to compliment me. So it wouldn't surprise me if these guys are just given really explicit orders to go out and compliment Trump. Here it is for you. I've just found this. So this is J.B. Pritzker.
For us, he really could have.
And I'll just make this a little louder for you.
He could have fought for us. He really could have. Instead, he made self-serving deals. He would send life-saving equipment if only we would agree to praise him on the Sunday talk shows. That is literally a deal that he put in front of me. I was desperate. My hospitals were filling up, and time was of the essence. So I agreed that I would do that if he sent me what we needed. Because my job at the time was to do virtually anything to get the White House to help us save lives. Needless to say, he never delivered for us. He never delivered for the American people. And Donald Trump proved who he really is in that critical moment.
So that's J.B. Pritzker saying, look, we wouldn't get aid if I didn't go and praise Donald Trump on the Sunday shows. So just be warned. I'm not saying that definitely has happened here, but when you hear people coming out and saying how wonderful, literally in ways that are almost creepy, in ways that I don't know that I would ever speak about anyone like that. Just like, say, oh, I did a really good job. It was really great in there. But like this, just so obsequious. You're just thinking, it looks like this is being manufactured to at least some degree there. But anyway, let's just go on. That's dub. So US and Russia are to hold talks in Jeddah on March the 23rd. That's Steve Witkoff. Discussions will focus on agreements reached during the Trump-Putin call. According to Witkoff, the temporary ceasefire deal includes a halt to all infrastructure strikes, not just energy targets. But of course, the readout's pretty different from the Russians as it is from the Americans. So this source says, ignore the lies from the Trump administration. Former Russian President Medvedev accurately described the phone call between Trump and Putin a complete sellout of Ukraine and our European allies. Shame on everyone who continues to enable Trump here. So that's Republicans against Trump. They're going to say that. So Dmitry Medvedev here then saying, so former, I forget which way round it was. So when Putin was Prime Minister, Medvedev was president, is that right? The call, and they kind of swap roles. The phone call between presidents Putin and Trump proved a well-known idea. There is only Russia and America in the dining room. On the menu, light appetizers, Brussels sprouts, British fish and chips, and Paris rooster. The main course is a Kiev-style cutlet. Enjoy your meal. And that's literally what he said. So you can go and check that. That is literally what he tweeted. Wow. This is the idea that the US and Russia are just carving up Europe. Literally eating up parts of Europe. They're making these deals about and without Europe and Ukraine. Jackie Heinrich says Russian Foreign Ministry just put out a post repeating that Putin demanded military aid and intelligence sharing to be stopped as a condition. President Trump says aid never came up in the call. Per the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, quote, concerning US President's proposal to declare a 30-day ceasefire, the Russian side outlined a number of significant points regarding ensuring effective control over a possible ceasefire along the entire front line, as well as the need to stop the forced mobilization in Ukraine and rearming the armed forces of Ukraine. It was pointed out that the complete cessation of providing Kiev with foreign military aid and intelligence must become the key condition for preventing an escalation of the conflict and making progress towards its resolution through political and diplomatic means. So they are very, very clear. And of course, Ukraine will not agree to that. They just will not. And surely the US knows that. And that might be. So the other explanation is that, okay, it's certainly plausible that, Trump forgot that was in the conversation. Or they didn't want to talk about that because they know that that is an absolute red line for Ukraine. And Ukraine are going to still get, even if the US isn't providing military equipment for Ukraine, Europe will. So Zelensky responded to Putin's ultimatums, quote, Putin takes a sensitive topic and raises the issue of mobilization. What is hidden behind this? Behind mobilization, intelligence and weapons. It's a weakening of the Ukrainian army. The issue is not mobilization itself. The issue is reducing the numerical strength of the Ukrainian army. He had this ultimatum at the beginning of the war. Zelensky noted. And that's absolutely right. They wanted the denazification and the demilitarization of Ukraine. Want to get rid of the Zelensky regime, as they saw it, and reduce the army to a completely pliable level. That's what they want now. I mean, this is kind of the Istanbul agreement all over again. Istanbul Accord all over again. So, yeah, I don't think... I mean, it's completely what we expected, that Russia would go in thinking in these terms. But I guess Trump just thought he could out-Trump Putin. And I don't think he's been able to. And in fact, this opinion needs to be on mainstream media much, much more. This is Josh Rogin, a lead global security analyst, Washington Post Intelligence, etc., etc. Okay.
And that's how, regretfully and crazily, this foreign relations are done these days. It's by convincing Trump that you're not the one that's causing the problem. And that's the battle that's going on. So I don't think Putin wants to stop fighting. I think he's going to figure out a way to try to pin it on Zelensky, and Zelensky's going to try to figure out a way to pin it on Putin. The problem that we're all dealing with is that the people in the Trump administration, including Trump, Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Don Jr., Tucker Carlson, and the rest of them, believe Putin and don't believe the U.S. intelligence community and don't believe, the Ukrainians and don't believe the reality. And that's an unsolvable problem, because how do you have a diplomatic negotiation where the mass murdering dictator who abducted 20,000 children has more credibility with the U.S. president than the victim and the president of the country that got attacked? That's just crazy. And I don't really, I've never figured out how to wrap my mind around solving that conundrum.
I mean, I think the other part...
And that's...
That is it. Trump is getting his information from these guys, and I can't get my head around that, he says. And on that note, it's very well worth knowing that, according to Politico, top Trump allies hold secret talks with Zelensky's Ukrainian opponents. So this is, what we know about in terms of, and in fact, it's talked about here as well. Let's bring this up from Max24. We heard that the other day, and now news is coming out that, it's a back channeling of Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, Jared Kushner. So these people are supposedly speaking to Zelensky's allies. You've got a complete undermining of Ukraine and Zelensky by the people that are supposed to be kind of not, okay, we know they're not negotiating on behalf of Ukraine, but they're mediating that conversation between the two, between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Well, actually, the Americans appear to be completely on the side of Russia, undermining Ukraine at every conceivable moment. And then that's where Trump is getting his information. So when you've got 2,500 troops being surrounded, which is just not happening, where is that coming from? Well, probably someone on Twitter feeding it to Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson feeding it to Trump. And Tucker Carlson's son writes the speeches for J.D. Vance. Like, these guys are in bed with each other, and the whole information space there is completely polluted. So then we hear this today from Reuters. In fact, let's go to the Reuters article. US suspends some efforts to counter Russian sabotage as Trump moves closer to Putin. So we kind of heard this previously. Then there was a denial that it was any defensive cyber projects that were affected. Pete Hegseth came out and said, there was some confusion about what's being cut back, and the end result appeared to have been that they've cut back offensive operations on Russia, but actually it seems to be much deeper than that. So Biden administration has established working groups to monitor escalating Russian hybrid war efforts. Under Trump, the National Security Council has stopped holding regular meetings with European officials on Russian sabotage. Trump's embrace of Moscow stirs fears of Ukraine truce favourable to Russia among current and former officials, so on and so forth. So they are cutting back these projects that involves at least 7 national security agencies working with European allies. So that's 7 agencies being affected there. And this article goes to talk about that. And then the Financial Times, as reported here by Class Report, says Donald Trump's efforts to broker peace are faltering. His call with Putin failed to secure a full ceasefire in Ukraine, with Russia only agreeing to limit attacks on energy targets. Meanwhile, a Gaza ceasefire collapsed, and Trump's foreign policy missteps are raising concerns about US influence and leverage. Critics say his impatience and lack of strategy are emboldening adversaries. So he doesn't have a strategy because he doesn't have the requisite knowledge, and he only knows about things from what people around him tell him, and the people around him are telling him complete lies. Hopefully we can see the problem here. So the US is not going to be helping Ukraine at all. It's just the whole system appears to be broken, corrupted, polluted. And Russia, on the one hand, are getting their way by being able to compromise the US here. But on the other hand, it makes it all rather unpredictable about what the US is going to do, because they're almost too aligned with Russia. And so Ukraine are never going to do what the US wants them to do. And so the US end up getting themselves really frustrated, but actually it's their own fault for being fully aligned with Russia, and it's all just a hot mess. Andrew Perpetua says it's funny, the US is gradually losing leverage over Ukraine as time goes on, because we're getting closer and closer to the sunset of the aid package given to Ukraine. Unless the US passes a new aid package, the leverage will be basically gone. Will Intel sharing continue after the aid package expires? Who knows? But actually, the key could be here what Zelensky said, which if the US does not provide us with intelligence, Ukraine will not know where the Russian ballistic missiles are flying. So, in terms of the peace negotiations, it's important to understand what leverage the US has. They clearly have leverage because Zelensky is still acquiescing to the US demands. He's still trying to sign these minerals deals and still trying to, appease Trump to some significant degree. Why is that? I asked this in last night's live. What is it that the US have over Ukraine that Ukraine desperately need and they can't get from anywhere else? And it has to be in the form of intelligence capabilities, and then what that leads to. And in this case, it's ballistic missiles hitting. Like, at the moment, ballistic missiles do not hit significant targets in Ukraine, particularly around Kiev. And if the US switch sides, it could mean that Russia can send whatever missiles they want into Kiev. And if that happens, Ukraine are in serious trouble. And this might be the absolute key to all of these negotiations. It's that capability that is making Ukraine want to do what the US want them to do to some significant degree. So that's the one to watch out for. Okay, I'm just going to leave you with this. Throw this into the mix that the Kremlin now wants to work with Elon Musk to go to Mars. And so Elon Musk is going to be meeting with the Kremlin soon. That's just how crazy this situation is and how compromised I think the American parties are. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.